Hey, have you seen Endgame yet? Well, in this video, what I want to do is I want to not review the movie, but what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the psychology in the movie that you can actually apply to your life. Particularly, what I want to look at is drivers, because in this movie, there are a couple drivers that are identified. In fact, it's why the end game is the end game, because in the first Avengers, they didn't have the same drivers. And in the second one, they actually have better motivators, which I think made the difference, right? That helped them be able to win the game. Anyway, if you want to learn about drivers and learn a tool that they use in the end games to help you better your life, this is the video I want you to check out. Yoga Psych. Ancient answers for your current problems. Hey, welcome back to Yoga Psych. I'm Brett, your favorite shrink, and this is where we're learning the psychology, the hidden truths behind Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, the ancient yogic practices. As we talked about in our trailer or intro today, particularly, I want to focus on movie psych, and we're going to look at the psychological principles and truths that we can find in Endgame, the Avengers, the last Avengers. The simplest way I can help you understand the truths that we saw in that movie is by thinking about drivers. We have two primary drivers for all of us. They are things that we avoid and things that we seek. Those are the two primary. Freud, he used to say it as the pleasure principle, and the pleasure principle was basically that our brain is hardwired in the brain stem, what I call B. It is hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, which sounds like the same thing, but they're not. They're very different in how they function. Well, if we look at the Avengers, well, the last two Avengers, what we see is that we get to see these two drivers in action. In the first Avengers movie, what we saw was the driver to avoid pain. And that's what it was all about. The whole theme was about how do we stop Thanos from destroying half of everybody and everything. How do we stop this monster, in our minds it's a monster, from hurting the people that we love? So we were avoiding something devastating. Now what was interesting is that Thanos didn't have that driver. Thanos, in fact, had the other driver. He was seeking something positive. He was seeking balance to the universe. He wasn't our normal, typical bad guy who is self-motivated in terms of self-grandizing and self-promoting and selfish motives. No. Thanos was looking for a way to help. And his idea of help was to bring balance by killing this overpopulation of people that was eating up and destroying the world, the universe, everything. So I'm not sure he was an evil character. I think he had good intentions. Did we like the intentions? Nah, probably not. Now, in the second Avengers, we saw a shift. We saw a shift in drivers. The second Avengers had a different agenda. Here, we were not out to avoid pain or avoid destruction, because the destruction had already occurred. So we had a different driver. And the new driver was to bring back the loved ones that we had, to reconnect, to create love again, to bring love again back into our lives. We miss those people. We miss the people that we lost, and we wanted them back. Why are those two different drivers important? Well, because your drivers, first thing you got to understand is drivers tend to get you more of what you're driving towards. And that's an important principle, because if your driver is to get rid of something, to avoid, Well, what you actually end up doing in driving away from something is you actually connect with that very thing, which is really weird. So, for example, if my driver is fear, and my fear is actually successful at getting rid of whatever I'm afraid of, what that does is it doesn't reinforce a sense of bravery or fearlessness. That actually reinforces in my brain, oh, fear worked, I'm going to do it again. Anytime I'm in a bad situation, anytime I'm in trouble, anytime I need to get rid of something or address something, fear worked, and I'm going to work it again. So unfortunately, our drivers tend to link to what it is. Now that would be good if our driver was a seeking driver. It was seeking connection, seeking love, seeking happiness, seeking confidence. That'd be great. Because as more I'm successful at linking to love, confidence, happiness, the more I get it. The other thing that's really bad about our drivers, or could be negative about drivers, particularly the avoiding, is that when you're in an avoiding mode and it doesn't work, what happens is that we collapse. Two perfect examples, and you will remember them from our movie, was Thor and Hawkeye. In the very beginning of the movie, we see Hawkeye. He's just on a killing rampage. And in my mind, he's not a lot different than Thanos, right? He's trying to restore balance to the universe by killing and destroying. Now, in his mind, he's justifying because he thinks these people are bad people, and because they're bad people, they need to be killed. But it's the same kind of idea. I want to kill people so I can save people. Okay. And then we have Thor. Fat Thor. Didn't you love Fat Thor? Fat Thor was awesome. But Fat Thor was a perfect example of you or me when we are in this avoidant mode, and then our avoidant mode doesn't work. When our avoidant mode falls apart, we collapse. And that's exactly what happened to Thor, is that he completely collapsed. And he went into despair, hopelessness, and then he just went into full-on avoiding life. Numbing himself with food, numbing himself with alcohol, numbing himself with just not thinking, not wanting to live. And that's kind of where we go, right? When we're avoiding and our avoiding doesn't work. So at the very best, our avoiding reinforces, and at the very worst, our avoiding actually makes it worse and causes us to collapse. Now, let's look at seeking. What does seeking do? Well, in this second Avengers, this Endgame Avengers, what we saw was that their seeking gave them a process. It gave them hopefully an end goal, but the process itself was part of it. The process itself was seek love, to seek connection, to bring positive. Even when people lost their lives in this movie, they did it not in despair or discouragement or collapse, but in love. So we saw two people die in this movie, and one of them was a Black Widow, and then the other one was Iron Man, Tony Stark. And particularly I want to focus on Tony Stark because Tony Stark finished his arc in this movie. He started off driven by self-pleasure, by seeking selfishness. And that was his whole life. Me, 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 me. And probably that seeking was really driven out of an emptiness. He wanted to try and fulfill himself. So even though it looks like it's a driving towards something, it was driving away. It was driving away from his emptiness, his lack of love, his lack of connection with people. And in this movie, what we saw was Tony almost didn't want to play because he had found what he had always been looking for: love, connection. In his little girl, in his wife, in his family. He didn't want to jeopardize or lose that. But what he found along the way was even more love in the team, but in his father. He reconnected in this movie to his father, and so he completed his story of being a lover, being connected. And because he felt connected in every way, because that hole that was always driving him had now been full, and that final piece was connecting to his father, he could go. He could go. It was done for him. So that's the difference between positive drivers and negative drivers. Negative drivers tend to give us more than negative, and when we don't get it, we get redoubled negative. But positive drivers, when I'm seeking something, even the process itself, and I can lose my life in the process, and that's good, and that's okay, because it's the process that gives fulfillment. And then positive drivers also reinforce the positive and give me more of what actually I want. Now, how? And that's the cool part about Avengers, is that Avengers also gave us a story of how. It gave us a technique of how to create positive. And what they did in this particular story was they used a technique called time travel. We've all used that technique, right? But we use it a little bit in a way that's not so useful. All of us have the fantasy of what would it be like to go back in time and be able to stop Lincoln from being killed, or to kill Adolf Hitler and to stop all that death and destruction. It's not the best way to use that technique, not for you personally. What I would suggest using that technique is, again, helping you create what you're seeking. So it's really fun for me, and I do this all the time, is I imagine myself going back into my past, into some dark times in my life. Times when I was very depressed, very alone, very sad, anxious. And I imagine myself going back in time with this self, with the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience, the confidence that I've developed over these years. And then I imagine that confident self replacing the fearful self. And I imagine, what would it be like? What if I was in that dark day, in those dark moments, and I brought confidence, and I brought strength, and I brought love, and I was moving towards something instead of always moving away from something. And what that does for me is it begins to rewire my brain. See, who I am is based on my story. And typically we base our stories based on our past experiences. You rewrite those past experiences, you rewrite your past, and what you're doing in essence is rewriting your story, and you're helping reinforce what you want, helping you reinforce moving towards something instead of away from it. So, bottom line, let me give you a homework assignment. I want you to take what the lessons we've learned from Endgame, from the Avengers, and I want you to apply it for yourself. This week, I want you to imagine yourself doing some time traveling. And I want you to go back in time. And I want you to see yourself when you're in those darkest avoiding modes, and just unfortunately reinforcing the pain of what you're trying to avoid by avoiding. I want you to go back to those dark moments in your life. And I want you to see yourself moving towards what you want. Love, connection, confidence, happiness, joy, whatever it is. See yourself in those moments, and what would I do if? What if I was confident? What would I look like? What would I act like? What would I be like? I want you to take that and make it, one of the techniques we use in Yoga Psych, make it a consideration for yourself and play with that. As you play with that, put any comments, put any experiences you like down into our comments so I can see how you're doing. Again, I'm Brett, your favorite shrink, and you're watching Yoga Psych. Take care. Hey, I haven't told you yet, make sure you go to yogapsych.com, because that's where you're going to find these ancient answers for your current problems. Take care.